They threw him in the river to keep his millions, but when a poor boy helped him, night fell with a strange weight. No wind, no stars, no sound of animals. The black car moved down the dirt road like a coffin in motion. It came to a sudden stop. The headlights went out. 2 men got out. One of them opened the trunk. Inside, a body, motionless, covered in blood and dirt, but still breathing. Without a word, they dragged him to the embankment. The stream ran shallow between rocks, mud, and branches. The smell of dirty water mixed with the smell of fear. The man in charge looked at the other with urgency and anger. The body was thrown like dead weight. It hit the rocks hard. The sound was dull, cruel. The car disappeared into the dark, and the water, cold and murky, began to hide what was left. The next morning, the Santa Clara neighborhood woke up as always, early with the noise of buses, the smell of stale bread, and too much hurry for those who have almost nothing. Diego Ramos, 12 years old, was already on the street. An old backpack on his shoulders, a plastic bag in his hands, eyes fixed on the ground. Collecting cans, caps, anything worth a few coins. He followed along the side of the road, where the grass grew tall. He knew the path by heart, but that shape stuck near the stream wasn't part of the scenery. From a distance, it looked like a pile of dirty clothes, but as he got closer, his heart raced. There was an arm among the weeds, swollen, cut up. The boy froze. He was going to run, but something stopped him. The arm moved, slowly, weakly, but it moved. Diego took 2 hesitant steps. The body was soaked, covered in bruises, the face barely recognizable as human, the eyes almost shut, but alive. He was still alive. Half an hour later, Rosa Martinez was sweating as she pushed a squeaky shopping cart that rattled with every pothole. Inside, the unconscious stranger, covered by a torn sheet. Blood stained the fabric and dripped down to the wheel. The house was simple. 2 rooms, the smell of soap and weak coffee. There, Diego helped as best he could. Rosa was a cleaner. She had raised her son alone since he was 5. She was tough, but fair. Never had time for useless questions. But that day she had no choice. She spent the next hours cleaning wounds, improvising bandages with boiled rags, trying to bring down the fever with cold compresses. The man moaned, mumbled scattered words, some in Portuguese, others hard to understand. When he tried to move, his body didn't respond. Over the next 2 days, Rosa shared what little she had with a complete stranger. She switched shifts at work, claimed to have migraines to stay home, and Diego, as always, played along naturally. While adults distrusted everything he believed, simple as that. The man woke up on the 3rd night, startled. He tried to sit up, groaned loudly, his eyes opened with difficulty. He looked around, recognized nothing, tried to speak, but his throat failed, tried to get up, fell again. He stayed there between lucidity and despair until he saw Diego at the doorway holding a bottle of water. The boy walked up slowly, held out the bottle. The man drank in silence. Their eyes met for an instant. Gratitude needed no words. Rosa watched from afar. She noticed the details. The man's hands weren't a worker's hands. They had ring marks. One ring, broken, still clung to his finger. In his pants pocket, she found a piece of a watch, gold, half the band, with a crest engraved. That wasn't ordinary. Neither was his tone of voice when he finally managed to form a sentence. "Where am I?" she answered calmly. Told him where they were. The neighborhood. What Diego had done. The stream. He closed his eyes, tried to piece the puzzle together in his own mind. After a few seconds, he whispered, "I was betrayed." The word hung in the air like smoke. "Bruno," he went on, struggling. "My brother." That was all he managed to say before passing out again. The following days were filled with silence and care. Rosa avoided questions. Diego, by instinct, did the opposite. He observed everything. The way the man stared at the walls as if expecting something to come out of them. The way he looked at his own hand, as if searching for memories. And above all, the fear in his eyes when he slept. It was fear of dying, but also of remembering. On Sunday, The man managed to sit up on his own for the first time. He asked for soup. Diego proudly brought it to him. They sat in the backyard, where the mango tree's shade sheltered them from the afternoon heat. The man asked the boy's name. Diego, he answered. After a while, Diego asked back softly, "And yours?" The man hesitated. "Andre, I think." The name sounded strange, as if he were trying to recognize himself within it. Diego simply nodded. After all, knowing his name seemed like a small thing, but it was a start. That night, Rosa had a serious talk with her son. She knew they were stepping into dangerous ground. That man wasn't just anyone. The body, the objects, the name, everything pointed to something big behind it, and dangerous. But Rosa also knew what it was like to be discarded, to be invisible. And no one, no matter how rich, deserved to die that way. She decided to protect the stranger as if he were part of the house, not out of heroism, but out of principle. In the week's last scene, Andre stared at the bedroom ceiling. He wasn't sleeping. Outside, the sound of distant dogs barking, the wind hitting the roof tiles, the smell of soap and laundry hanging to dry. He didn't remember everything, but he remembered his brother's cold stare before being thrown into the stream. He remembered the pain, the abandonment, and now he was alive thanks to a poor child and a woman who owed him nothing. The irony of it all made him laugh, and at the same time, it hurt more than his broken ribs. Rosa outside watched through the crack in the door, wondered about what they were doing. She knew there would be a price. But she also knew, sometimes the right thing is what you do in the dark when no one's watching. Diego slept on the living room floor, a book open on his chest. He was the only one sleeping peacefully. In the corner of the bedroom, on the chair, lay the broken piece of the watch. The gold still shone, even dirty. Engraved on it, the initials AS. A man without memory, but not without a past. Time seemed to move sideways in the Ramos household. The hours didn't pass. They just slipped away like water on an old roof. But inside that cramped space, something rare was happening. 3 lives from distant worlds, crossing paths in silence, and healing without knowing it. Andre still carried a broken body and a scrambled mind. He slept a lot, sweated with fever, and dreamed of muffled voices, tense meetings, numbers on screens, glasses clinking, false laughter. But above all, he saw a face, a look. His brother, Bruno, the one who smiled on the outside and schemed on the inside. The memories came little by little, like splinters cutting into flesh without asking permission. He didn't tell Rosa or Diego what he already remembered. He preferred silence, maybe also out of fear of saying out loud what he already knew, that someone had tried to kill him out of ambition, and that someone had the same blood as he did. While his body recovered, the world around him kept going. Rosa woke up early, left home before the sun, and returned only after daylight had fled the sky. Time in that house was measured by pots on the stove and by the weariness in her eyes at nightfall. Rosa didn't ask questions. What she needed to know, she observed. Andre's manners, his restrained gestures, the careful way he spoke, the attention he gave the boy. He wasn't an ordinary man. He wasn't from there. But he wasn't a threat either. Diego got attached quickly. Kids have a sense for who's real. And Andre, even crushed by the world, still had something intact. Decency. The boy brought him soup, showed him homework, told him funny stories. Andre listened with patience, and little by little began correcting mistakes, suggesting better ways, teaching without sounding like a teacher. Over time, the exchange became routine. Diego came back from school with wrinkled sheets of paper, and Andre was there waiting with a pencil in hand. There was no pressure, only building, and an honest look that said, "You can do more." One Saturday afternoon, Rosa came home with her eyes downcast. She had been humiliated by her employer in front of the other workers, for nothing, just because she could. Rosa didn't tell, but she didn't need to. Andre saw in her silence the scream that never came out. The next morning, she found a note in her apron. "You weren't born to be stepped on, but to step firmly." She kept it in her pocket, and that day walked with her chin a little higher. Andre watched the neighborhood closely. Simple people, repetitive routines, loud voices in the late afternoon, the smell of burnt rice and laundry drying in the yard. None of it matched the world he once knew. But there, even in scarcity, he found something that made more sense than any spreadsheet or gala cocktail. People took care of one another. And it touched him in a way he didn't understand, or maybe had never allowed himself to understand before. On the city's south side, Bruno bit his nails while smiling for cameras and signing contracts. Pretending was his greatest skill, but the absence of a body was starting to weigh on him. The police asked questions with calculated gentleness. Investors called with worried voices. Lawyers pressed for answers he didn't have. He swore he had erased his brother from the map. But something nagged at him, as if Andre's shadow was still lurking, waiting for the right time to return. And it was. Andre didn't want revenge, but he had no intention of staying invisible forever. When his memories finally came back in full, he understood the danger he was bringing to that house. He couldn't stay, but he couldn't leave without making sure Rosa and Diego were protected. On a stifling afternoon, he slipped out quietly, walking through alleys until he reached a payphone 4 neighborhoods away. He called the only name he trusted, Carlos Mendez, an old lawyer, loyal and discreet. 5 minutes of conversation was enough. Carlos understood everything in his tone of voice, asked no questions, just listened and promised to act. In the days that followed, while Diego studied and Rosa kept working, Andre wrote papers that would seal destinies, documents, instructions, transfers, all done in silence, with the precision of a man used to moving the world without being seen. In one letter, he ordered a house to be purchased in Rosa's name in a better neighborhood. In another, he created a fund that would release $5 million to Diego when he turned 18. And still another, a lifetime pension for Rosa. Enough that she would never again bow her head to anyone. Carlos would receive everything and execute it discreetly. No one would know the benefactor's name. No one would connect the dots. Only the two of them. And that was enough. One Sunday afternoon, Andre took Diego to a dirt field. Kids were playing soccer. The boy smiled when he saw a friend fall, and another rushed to help without hesitation. Andre looked at that scene with damp eyes. There, among torn cleats and sincere laughter, he saw something his fortune had never bought: free generosity. Diego said he wanted to be a doctor, that he dreamed of helping people like his mother, like the neighbors, like him. Andre didn't respond, but something lit up inside him. That night he wrote the last letter. It was short, unsigned, but with enough truth to outlast the years. He would leave it on the boy's pillow. 4 in the morning. The city slept. Rosa woke to the creak of the door. Andre was dressed as he had been the day he arrived. Clean suit, upright posture, eyes tired but steady. He didn't say much, neither did Rosa, but there was deep respect in that silence, a mutual understanding between two people who had seen the worst of the world, yet still knew how to trust. He handed her an envelope. She hesitated but took it. It wasn't charity. It was recognition. At dawn, Diego woke and found the note. He read it in silence. Stared at the ceiling for long minutes. He didn't cry, but his chest hurt. Outside, Andre's chair was still in the yard, empty. Elsewhere in the city, Carlos Mendez received the documents. He called a contact. The machine began to turn. At Bruno's office, an investigator knocked on the door. At the bank, an anonymous transaction froze suspicious accounts. And in a rented car, cutting down the highway, a man left behind not just an identity, but an entire life. He was hiding not out of cowardice, but out of love. And soon no one would know where he was, but two hearts would forever remember what he had done. Andre's disappearance wasn't noticed by newspapers nor by neighbors. He vanished as if he had never existed. No luggage, no traces, no goodbyes, just an empty space, the one that Rosa and Diego felt with the intensity of losing something they hadn't even known they needed. In the first days, Rosa woke up expecting to hear him cough, drag the chair, comment on the weather. Diego left for school imagining he would be at the door, ready to correct his homework or point out a grammar mistake. But the house was silent, and the emptiness had weight. Even so, life went on. Rosa went back to work with a firmer body and calmer gaze. There was something in her that hadn't been there before, non-negotiable dignity. She was no longer seen bowed, not by orders, not by humiliation. Diego threw himself into his studies, more focused, more curious. It was as if he carried a mission on his shoulders, as if he knew, even without fully understanding, that he had something to accomplish for someone who believed in him when no one else did. Weeks later, the first surprise arrived. A brown envelope. No sender. Addressed to Rosa. Inside, only a key and a note with one sentence. "You don't need to survive anymore. Now you can live." The next day, a realtor called. He informed her that the house in the Parque das Palmeiras neighborhood was cleared for the new owner. The name on the deed, Rosa Martinez. She thought it was a scam, but the paperwork was official, the title was legitimate, and no one asked for anything in return. Not knowing who to thank, she cried, not from fear, but from relief. She left without fuss, cleaned the old little house, watered the plants, and placed a letter under the front tile, where she knew Diego never touched. There, Andre had written days earlier, "I left so I wouldn't cause harm, but I planted something. Take care of what grows." The new house was small but bright. Quiet street, better school, neighbors who greeted with respect. For Diego, it was like moving to another planet. He had space to study, a desk just for him, and most important, safety. He didn't know it yet, but that change was only the beginning. Meanwhile, Bruno Silva's story was beginning to unravel. Andre's disappearance, once muffled, was gaining strength in financial circles. Partners demanded explanations. Tax investigations appeared. Newspapers began sniffing around. And when Carlos Mendez, with flawless documents and deadlines, took the case to court, the effect was immediate. The charges were complete: attempted homicide, asset concealment, corporate fraud. Bruno was caught off guard, tried to use influence, bought silence. But there was nowhere left to hide. The judge accepted the request. Police knocked at his door. Headlines soon followed. Bruno Silva arrested in operation involving multi-million-dollar embezzlement and suspected murder. They just didn't know, yet, that the victim was still alive. In the new house, the days were lighter, but Diego felt the absence of something he couldn't name, until on his 13th birthday, another envelope arrived. Simple, white, unmarked. Inside, a handwritten letter. The first of many. "Happy birthday. The world will try to tell you who you are. Don't listen, you already know." There was no signature, but Diego recognized the handwriting. He kept the letter inside a notebook, and every year, on the same date, another would arrive. Always with just one phrase, direct, firm, as if the sender knew exactly what the boy needed to hear at that stage of life. At 14, it read, "Don't compare yourself. You have your own path." At 15, "Your worth doesn't depend on what you have, but on what you give." The letters became a beacon. At 16, Diego started working at a pharmacy. At 17, he began tutoring neighborhood children. He already spoke with clarity, already carried himself with posture. The community noticed. His mother did too. At 18, the turning point. Carlos Mendez appeared for the first time, an elegant, discreet man with a leather briefcase and a respectful tone. He said he was there to fulfill an old commitment. He presented documents, contracts, foreign accounts. Diego didn't understand at first. Rosa stood frozen, but Carlos explained patiently. A fund had been created years ago, destined exclusively for Diego Ramos, with automatic release when he turned 18. $5 million, no conditions, no clauses. He also delivered the house deed and the letter that accompanied Andre's will. "This money is only a tool. The rest you already have. Use it wisely, serve with courage." Diego didn't waste it on luxury. He enrolled straight into medical school, a public university, but now with the means to live with dignity. His classmates noticed something different about him. He spoke with respect, listened attentively. But he never mentioned wealth, inheritance, none of it. He only spoke of his mother and of a man who had taught him to see the world differently. While he studied, Diego kept the ritual. Every letter from André was read in silence on the same day of the year. He kept them all, reread them on difficult nights. When he turned 20, the phrase was, "Pain will pass, but what you do with it, that remains." And so he grew. Bruno got 25 years in prison, tried to appeal, without success. At trial, the evidence was so overwhelming that no one dared defend him publicly. André's missing body was a mystery, but justice prevailed anyway. The company was liquidated. Assets turned over to creditors. The Silva family's reputation sank for good. Carlos Mendez, discreet as always, stepped away after completing everything André had asked. He never appeared again. And André? He remained anonymous. Rumors said he lived abroad, others that he had changed his name, but the truth was much simpler. He had chosen peace. Far from the spotlight, he taught in community schools, translated books, wrote letters, one per year, always one per year. When Diego graduated at 24, the letter read, "I'm not proud of your diploma, I'm proud of your choice." In the graduation photo, beside his mother, there was a small frame with André's image. At first, no one understood, but no one questioned it either. It was clear that whoever that man was, he was family. Diego specialized in social medicine, returned to the neighborhood where he had grown up, now in a white coat, but with the same steady gaze. He created projects, opened a clinic, treated people no one wanted to treat. He refused fame, gave talks in schools, encouraged other young people not to give up. He married Lucia Torres, a science teacher. They had 2 children. The first was named André. Rosa's house became a meeting place, full of life, laughter, stories. She herself went back to studying, finished high school, started reading novels and writing short texts. A once invisible woman who had become a beacon for others. The last letter arrived on Diego's 32nd birthday. When the words stop, don't look for the end. Look for what remains. After that, silence. No new message, no sign, nothing. Diego understood. André was gone for good. But he hadn't left emptiness. He had left a legacy. The years passed as they do for those who live with purpose, not in a rush, but with direction. Diego grew old serving, always in the same neighborhood, where the alleys had names and the faces had stories. He had become one of those rare doctors who looked at the patient before the chart, who listened more than he spoke, who came home with his coat stained by humanity. The community clinic grew. New people arrived, other professionals, volunteers. Diego never put his own name on the sign. He said the only thing that mattered was keeping the door open. Lucia, his partner, understood. The 2 of them shared more than a home. They shared a vision of the world. They raised their children with books, affection, and honesty, and they never let comfort erase the memory of where they had come from. The eldest son, André, carried the name with pride, even without knowing the whole story. He knew it was special. He knew the name came from someone his father revered in silence, and it was in silence that Diego lived the absence. After the last letter, at 32, nothing else ever came. No sign, no explanation. He understood, and he respected it. He kept the letters in a wooden box locked in the back of the closet, 32 in all, each handwritten, each with words that shaped his steps. He never showed them to anyone, but he reread them from time to time, like someone visiting a tomb without a headstone. Rosa grew older but never weaker. She became a kind of matriarch of the neighborhood, the sort everyone listened to even without her raising her voice. She gave advice, cared for children, planted flowers in the yard. In her house the past was seed, not scar. Sometimes at dusk she sat on the porch and looked at the sky. No one knew, but in those moments she thought of a man who had spent only a few months under her roof, yet had changed the course of everything. Diego was 67 when doctors began speaking of a chronic condition, of constant monitoring, of limitations. He smiled. He had seen that look in others before. Now it was his turn. He didn't try to fight time. He simply used his minutes better. He wrote letters, recorded audio, organized papers, and in a black notebook he wrote the truth. There he told everything, who André was, how he had been found, what he had left, what he had taught. He explained the money, the properties, the letters, but above all he explained the value of something that cannot be bought, being loved without condition. When he finished, he closed the notebook and wrote on the cover, "For when I'm no longer here," he died peacefully, at home, beside Lucia, his children, his grandchildren, with Rosa's hand in his. At the wake, people came from everywhere, patients, former students, neighbors, officials. Many didn't know where that man had come from. They only knew he had made a difference. Lucia found the notebook days later. She read it alone, cried alone, then called the children. And there, sitting in the living room that still carried his scent, the family learned the story. The silent savior, the abandoned millionaire, the chosen father. When the story came out, the country reacted as if to a secret too beautiful to be forgotten. Newspapers recounted the journey. TV shows asked for interviews. Politicians quoted his name in speeches. But Lucia refused the spotlight. She said it wasn't a spectacle, it was inheritance. The only thing she allowed was what Diego had already asked for in life, an annual ritual. Every year, on the day Diego had found Andre on the brink of death, the clinic opened its doors for a special event. No one worked that day. Doctors, teachers, patients, and families gathered. There were no long speeches, just a single reading, one of Andre's letters, chosen among the 32. At the clinic's entrance, a bronze plaque was installed discreetly. It read, "In honor of a man without a family and a boy without a father. One taught how to live, the other taught how to serve." The house where Rosa lived until the end of her life now houses a women's support center. In the main hall, a portrait of her sits, rocking chair and book in her lap. Beneath it, the phrase she had once found in a note years before, "You weren't born to be stepped on, but to step firmly." Diego's grave lies in a simple field, with low trees and flowers growing untended. The headstone is modest but powerful. It reads, "Son of Rosa Martinez and Andre Silva. One gave me life. The other taught me how to live it, nothing more and nothing less." No one knows where Andre was buried, not even if he was. He may have been cremated. He may have vanished as he had lived his last years, discreet, almost invisible. But for those who mattered, he had never truly left. He remained in the curious eyes of a grandson named Andre, in the letters still read every year, in the smile of every child treated at the clinic, in the firm stance of every young person who refused to bow their head. Andre Silva died without a statue, without a biography, without public glory. But he lived as few ever lived. And Diego, he died old, but never grew old inside. He lived without haste, and when he departed, he left no longing, he left presence.